What ingenious meals kept Japanese soldiers fed during the toughest of times in World War II? With extreme rationing and not a penny to their name, the military came up with some creative ways to keep troops marching. So let's take a look at the budget meals they survived on. Barley rice was something to really stop and stare at. Mixing barley with white rice meant you could feed twice as many soldiers with the same amount of grain. Barley rice, or mugi gohan, was inexplicably tied to World War II. Pure white rice became more of a luxury than a guarantee. The Japanese government saw the sheer value in barley rice and pushed the idea even further. Suddenly, every military kitchen had a standard ratio that you could use. Makes sense, since it means most of the pure rice goes to the officers and high command. The texture was chewier than regular rice, and it kept soldiers feeling full for way longer. Dried sweet potato strips were always something that Japan enjoyed greatly, mostly thanks to their agricultural traditions. They didn't become a military sensation until the Pacific War hit, though. That entire period saw an insane spike in the general perception of sweet potatoes. Basically, anything that was vaguely similar to a portable energy source was suddenly God's greatest gift to Earth. A lot of soldiers were lost in the face of rations that just didn't last very long. The government of Japan decided to encourage commanders to cultivate some new solutions. One of those happens to be hoshi imo, and it was just as convenient as it sounds. Vitamin-rich food that you can carry right in your pack that no one has to refrigerate. These strips were chewy, sweet, and didn't spoil for months on end. Soldiers would gnaw on them during long marches or save them for when morale dipped low. Fermented soybean paste soup is but a humble dish that comes right from tales of farm wives making hearty breakfasts for their families. Miso shiru is as vintage as a recipe can get. Miso itself is one of the most ancient preserved foods Japan has. The idea of turning it into a warming soup became essential to military life when rations weren't looking so generous. It was in everyone's mutual interest to play it smart. There was a lot of inspiration to take from all the different regional miso styles around Japan. Miso soup used whatever vegetables or seaweed happened to be available at the time, but the core ingredients stayed the same. It was now not just a peasant dish for field workers, but something every soldier had daily, because it was the best comfort they could get. This soup reminded them of home. Pickled vegetables and salted preservation methods were recipes that really stuck true to that entire concept of never letting anything go to waste. Tsukemono, tsukemono have been a favorite all over Japan, and that only became more true during the war. Normally, pickles were just what you would call a side dish accompaniment. A lot of families used the recipe as a way to preserve summer harvests for winter months. Skip to the 1940s though, and you'll see nothing but reliance on this preservation method. The concept here is food that stays edible for months without refrigeration. Cabbage, radishes, cucumbers, eggplant, and anything that could be salted or fermented worked. Sometimes the pickles weren't substantial enough on their own, but paired with plain rice, they added the kind of sharp, salty flavor that made bland meals tolerable. Tsukemono were powerhouses made exclusively out of stuff that was either about to spoil or needed to last through long campaigns. Soy sauce-flavored dried fish shares a theme with the pickled vegetables we just discussed, because both were phenomenal ways to make protein last indefinitely. Niboshi were small dried sardines that got cooked in soy sauce and stored in tins or jars. The earliest uses of dried fish in Japan go back over 1,000 years. Over time, the method was adapted to military needs and mass-produced versions were made standard. These ones just prioritized being lightweight and calorie-dense. The reason you'd want that is because it would keep soldiers energized during forced marches. The fish would work as a flavoring agent for otherwise plain rice. The soy sauce added that umami punch everyone craved. Niboshi really emphasized the mentality of using every part of the catch. It's definitely something that brought a taste of the ocean to landlocked soldiers. You might be surprised to hear steamed rice with salted plum on this list. Umeboshi onigiri back in the day were pretty much the ultimate field ration. Compact, portable, and naturally preserved by the sour plum in the center. There was this entire concept of preservation-based cooking that was pretty much exclusive to that time period. Units would prepare hundreds of these rice balls before deployment. They'd wrap them in bamboo leaves or cloth, and it would keep them edible for days without spoiling. The idea was that soldiers would get quick energy, reliable nutrition, and a morale boost all in one handful. You'd have the rice shaped into a triangle or ball with the umeboshi, tucked inside, and sometimes a strip of dried seaweed wrapped around it for grip. The saltiness of the plum prevented bacterial growth, which was critical in hot climates where food spoiled within hours. Military ration rice crackers were another really inexpensive way to provide quick energy without weighing down supply lines. Senbei were originally a luxury snack made from premium rice and sold at festivals back in peacetime. But wartime versions were much simpler. The military started mass-producing these crackers using cheaper grains and whatever flavoring agents were available. The result was a crunchy, shelf-stable snack that could be issued during forced marches or held in reserve for emergencies. The crackers weren't fancy by any stretch, but they didn't need to be. What mattered was that they provided calories and didn't crumble into dust during transport. Some versions had sesame seeds baked in, while others were left plain. These crackers became so iconic that even decades after the war ended, veterans would talk about crunching senbei during night watches. Boiled lotus root and carrot is a dish that really captures the spirit of making something beautiful out of very little. Kinpira renkon was a home-style recipe that somehow made its way into military kitchens. Lotus root was cheap, abundant, and symbolically important in Japanese culture. The holes running through each slice represented clarity and a clear path forward. Carrots added color and sweetness to balance the earthy flavor of the lotus root. The preparation was simple. You'd julienne the vegetables, stir-fry them with a bit of oil or animal fat if available, and then season everything with soy sauce, sugar, and a pinch of chili pepper. The bright orange and white colors made otherwise drab meal trays look a little more appealing. Soldiers would sometimes write home about how a serving of kinpira reminded them of their mother's cooking. Dried seaweed sheets were lightweight, mineral-rich rations that enhanced otherwise bland rice dishes. Nori had been a staple in Japanese cuisine for centuries, but during the war, it became a critical component of military rations. The sheets were paper-thin, dark green or black, and packed with iodine, iron, and other nutrients that were hard to come by. Soldiers would tear off small pieces and wrap them around rice balls, or crumble them into soup for added flavor and texture. Some units received pre-toasted nori, which had a nutty aroma and crispy texture, while others got raw sheets that needed to be lightly toasted over a campfire before eating. Either way, the seaweed added a salty umami. Richness that made plain rice feel less monotonous. The fact that nori was so lightweight meant that soldiers could carry several sheets in their packs without adding any significant weight. Soybean stew was a hearty, protein-packed dish that used soaked beans in soy broth and became a cornerstone of military nutrition. Daizu nimono was essentially a slow-cooked stew that could be prepared in large quantities. The beans themselves were soaked overnight to reduce cooking time, and then simmered with whatever vegetables or aromatics happened to be available. Onions, burdock root, carrots, or even dried fish could be added depending on the supply situation. The result was a thick, savory stew that stuck to your ribs and kept you warm during cold nights. The protein content was especially important because meat was scarce, and soybeans offered one of the few plant-based sources of complete protein. Soldiers who ate this regularly reported feeling fuller and more energized. The stew could also be eaten cold if necessary. Canned mackerel in soy sauce was one of the few meat-like luxuries preserved for long deployments, and it became a highly prized item among soldiers. The canning process allowed the military to store fish for months or even years without refrigeration. The mackerel was cooked in a thick, soy-based sauce that added flavor and helped mask any fishy taste that might develop over time. Soldiers would eat the fish straight from the can or mix it with rice to stretch the portion further. The oily richness of the mackerel provided much-needed fat and calories. Some soldiers would save their canned mackerel for special occasions or share it with comrades during moments of low morale. The cans themselves were small and sturdy enough to fit into a pack. The popularity of canned mackerel during the war led to a lasting cultural preference for canned fish in Japan. Rice mixed with sweet potato was a calorie-dense, morale-lifting comfort meal during shortages. Imo gohan combined the starchy sweetness of sweet potatoes with the familiar texture of rice, creating a dish that felt more substantial and satisfying. The sweet potatoes were cut into chunks and cooked directly with the rice, so that their natural sugars infused every grain. The result was a slightly sticky, slightly sweet dish that reminded many soldiers of home-cooked meals from their childhoods. The preparation was simple enough that even inexperienced cooks could manage it. The dish also had the advantage of being filling without requiring large amounts of rice. Soldiers would sometimes receive imo gohan. On rest days or after particularly difficult battles, soldiers would enjoy a dish called imo gohan as a way to boost morale. The sweetness of the potatoes offered a rare moment of pleasure in an otherwise harsh existence. Salted dried sardines were a common protein source for both naval and land troops. Iriko were small fish that had been gutted, dried, and salted to preserve them indefinitely. The process was simple but effective, allowing the military to stockpile massive quantities of protein that wouldn't spoil even in tropical heat. The sardines were usually eaten whole, including the bones, which provided calcium and other minerals. Soldiers would eat them as a crunchy snack, or add them to rice and soup for extra flavor. The salty taste was intense, but it helped replace electrolytes lost through sweating during long marches. The fish were also lightweight and compact, making them ideal for carrying in a soldier's personal pack. The smell of dried sardines became synonymous with military life. Despite this, the sardines were nutritionally valuable and played a key role in keeping soldiers fed. Pickled radish was a crunchy, vibrant yellow pickle that reminded soldiers of home kitchens. Takuan was made by fermenting daikon radish in rice bran, salt, and sometimes turmeric, which gave it that distinctive bright yellow hue. The pickling process took weeks, but the result was a vegetable that could last for months without refrigeration. The crunchy texture and tangy flavor made takuan a popular accompaniment to plain rice, and it helped stimulate appetites that had been dulled by repetitive meals. Soldiers would receive takuan in small portions, often just a few slices per meal. The radish was also believed to aid digestion, which was important given the heavy reliance on rice and other starchy foods. Some soldiers would save their takuan slices and trade them with comrades for other rations. The bright yellow color was visually appealing and served as a reminder that not everything in wartime had to be gray and flavorless. Soybean flour candy was a sweetened, powdery treat made from soy flour and syrup for quick energy. Kinako ame was essentially a mix of roasted soybean flour, sugar or syrup, and sometimes a bit of starch to bind everything together. The result was a crumbly, chewy candy that tasted nutty and mildly sweet. It wasn't as refined as the candies soldiers might have enjoyed before the war, but it was still a treat that boosted morale. The soybean flour offered some protein, which made the candy slightly more nutritious than pure sugar alternatives. Soldiers would receive kinako ame in small packets or wrapped in wax paper. The candy was easy to produce using ingredients that were readily available in Japan. Some soldiers would melt their kinako ame over a campfire to create a sticky syrup that could be drizzled over rice or crackers. The sweetness was a powerful reminder of peacetime and normalcy. Soup with foraged greens was made from wild mountain greens collected near camps. It became a practical solution to the shortage of cultivated vegetables. Nozawana soup used leafy greens that grew wild in mountainous regions and could be harvested by soldiers during rest periods. The greens had a slightly bitter flavor, but when cooked in miso or soy broth, they became tender and palatable. The soup provided vitamins and minerals that were otherwise hard to obtain in a diet dominated by rice and preserved fish. Soldiers stationed in rural areas had better access to foraged greens, while those in urban garrisons or on ships had to rely on whatever dried or pickled vegetables were available. The act of foraging also gave soldiers a sense of purpose and connection to the land. Some units made foraging a regular activity. The soup itself was simple to prepare, requiring only boiling water and a bit of seasoning. Rice gruel was a comforting, easy-to-digest porridge given to the ill or weak soldiers who couldn't handle regular meals. Okayu was made by cooking rice in a large amount of water until it broke down into a soft, almost soupy consistency. The result was a bland but soothing dish that was gentle on the stomach. The gruel could be flavored with a bit of salt, miso, or pickled plum depending on what was available, but it was often served plain to avoid upsetting sensitive stomachs. Soldiers who were recovering from illness, injury, or malnutrition would receive okayu as part of their medical care. The dish was also given to soldiers who were too exhausted to chew solid food. Okayu required very little rice to make since the grains expanded significantly during cooking. The warmth and simplicity of the gruel provided comfort to soldiers who were at their lowest points. Roasted barley tea was served as a caffeine-free beverage when tea leaves were rationed. Mugicha was made by roasting barley grains until they turned dark brown and then steeping them in hot or cold water. The result was a nutty, slightly bitter drink that was refreshing and easy to produce in large quantities. The lack of caffeine meant that soldiers could drink it throughout the day without worrying about insomnia or jitters. The tea could be served hot in the winter to warm soldiers up, or cold in the summer to help them cool down. The barley used for mugicha was often the same. Preserved plum paste was spread on rice or crackers for flavor and antibacterial benefits. Ume paste was made by mashing umeboshi into a thick, salty, sour spread that could be stored in small jars or metal tins. The paste had a concentrated flavor that was much stronger than whole plums, and a little bit went a long way. Soldiers would smear ume paste on rice balls to enhance their flavor, or mix it into soups and stews for added acidity. The antibacterial properties of the paste were well known, and it was believed to help prevent food poisoning and stomach ailments. The paste could also be dissolved in hot water to create a sour drink that was thought to aid digestion and boost energy. Some soldiers used yumi paste as a kind of seasoning or condiment. The intense sourness was polarizing. Some soldiers loved it, while others found it almost unbearable. Canned horse meat was used when fish or pork supplies were impossible to secure. Babaniku can was exactly what it sounds like: horse meat that had been cooked, seasoned, and sealed in cans for long-term storage. The meat was dark, tough, and had a gamey flavor that many soldiers found off-putting, but it provided protein and fat that were essential for survival. The use of horse meat was not traditional in Japanese cuisine, and many soldiers had cultural reservations about eating it. However, the realities of war left little room for culinary preferences. The canned horse meat could be eaten cold straight from the can, or heated up and added to stews or fried rice. The texture was chewy and stringy, which made it less appealing than canned fish or pork. Some soldiers joked that eating horse meat made them feel stronger or faster. Fermented bean paste balls were protein-rich snacks formed from leftover miso and rice bran. Miso dango were small, round balls made by mixing miso paste with toasted rice bran or flour, and sometimes a bit of sugar or sesame seeds. The mixture was formed into bite-sized pieces and left to dry slightly so they could be carried without falling apart. The result was a dense, chewy snack that tasted intensely savory with a hint of fermentation. The balls provided protein, fiber, and probiotics, all important for maintaining health during long deployments. Soldiers would eat miso dango as a quick snack between meals, or dissolve them in hot water to create an instant miso soup. The convenience and portability made them ideal for soldiers who were constantly on the move. The strong flavor meant that even a small amount could satisfy cravings for something savory and substantial. Grilled rice cakes were used on holidays and ceremonies to maintain morale in camp life. Yakimochi, were made by grilling small cakes of pounded rice over an open flame until they puffed up and developed a crispy, charred exterior. The inside remained soft and chewy, creating a satisfying contrast in texture. The rice cakes were usually eaten plain, but sometimes they were brushed with soy sauce or wrapped in seaweed for added flavor. The preparation of yakimochi was often a communal activity, with soldiers gathering around a fire to grill their own cakes and share stories. The act of making and eating these rice cakes provided a brief respite from the harsh realities of war. The cakes were also offered as part. The simplicity of yakimochi made them accessible to everyone, regardless of rank or background. Dried kelp strips were boiled into soup for minerals or eaten directly as salty snacks. Kombu was harvested from coastal waters, dried in the sun, and cut into strips that could be stored indefinitely without refrigeration. The kelp was rich in iodine, calcium, and other minerals that were essential for maintaining health. Soldiers would add kombu to soups and stews to enhance the flavor and create a rich umami broth. The kelp could also be eaten directly as a chewy, salty snack, though the texture was tough and required some effort to chew through. The simplicity of kombu made it a staple in military rations, and it was distributed to units across all theaters of the war. The strips were lightweight and compact, which made them easy to transport and store. The resulting broth was flavorful and nutritious, and it formed the base for many other dishes. Powdered soy milk drink was a rare but valuable ration, offering protein and a milk substitute for soldiers who had gone months without dairy products. The powder was made by drying soy milk into a fine dust that could be reconstituted with water. The result was a creamy, slightly sweet beverage that tasted vaguely like cow's milk, but with a distinct soybean flavor. The drink was not as rich or satisfying as real milk, but it provided protein, calcium, and other nutrients that were difficult to obtain in a wartime diet. Soldiers would mix the powder with hot or cold water depending on the season. Some soldiers used the powder to make a kind of porridge by mixing it with rice or barley. The rarity of powdered soy milk made it a prized item. The taste was mild enough that most soldiers could tolerate it. Fried rice with scraps was a camp version that used leftover fish bits, onions, or cabbage. Chahan-style dishes were popular in military kitchens, because they could be made quickly in large quantities. The base was always rice, but everything else was flexible. Soldiers might add crumbled dried fish, diced vegetables, bits of canned meat, or even pickled radish depending on what was on hand. The rice was fried in a bit of oil or animal fat, which added richness and flavor, and then seasoned with soy sauce or salt. The result was a savory one-pot meal that was filling and satisfying. The communal aspect of making fried rice also boosted morale, as soldiers would gather around the cooking area and contribute whatever scraps they had. The dish was often made during rest days or after successful operations. The flexibility of charhan meant that no two batches tasted exactly the same. Stewed root vegetables was a dish adapted from home recipes, minus beef, yet still hearty. Nikujaga without meat sounds like a contradiction, but during wartime, it was a necessary adaptation. The original dish was a beloved home-style stew made with beef, potatoes, onions, and a sweet soy-based sauce. But with meat in short supply, military cooks had to get creative. The solution was to focus on the vegetables themselves. Potatoes, carrots, and onions were simmered in a flavorful broth made from soy sauce, sugar, and dashi until they became tender and infused with umami. The result was a stew that was hearty, filling, and surprisingly satisfying even without any meat. The vegetables absorbed all the flavors from the broth. Soldiers who grew up eating nikujaga at home appreciated the effort to recreate a familiar dish. The comfort of eating something that reminded them of home was invaluable for morale. Sweet rice balls were special occasion treats made from stored red beans and rice. Anko mochi were made by wrapping sweetened red bean paste in soft pounded rice, creating a chewy sweet confection that was labor-intensive to prepare. The red beans had to be cooked, mashed, and sweetened with precious sugar or syrup, while the rice had to be pounded until it reached the right sticky consistency. The effort required meant that anko mochi were reserved for special occasions like New Year festivals, victories, or memorial ceremonies. The treats were a powerful morale booster because they represented a connection to peacetime traditions. Soldiers who received anko mochi felt a sense of gratitude and appreciation. The sweetness was a rare pleasure that stood in stark contrast to the salty and savory flavors that dominated most meals. The act of sharing anko mochi among comrades reinforced bonds and created moments of joy. Canned bamboo shoots in brine were crunchy additions that brought texture and nutrition to soldier meals. The bamboo shoots were harvested young while they were still tender, and then packed in salty brine to preserve them. The canning process allowed them to be stored for months without losing their crisp texture or mild flavor. Soldiers would drain the brine and rinse the bamboo shoots before adding them to stir fries, soups, or rice dishes. The crunchy texture was a welcome contrast to the soft, mushy consistency of most military food. The bamboo shoots were also low in calories but high in fiber, which made them filling without being heavy. The mild flavor meant they could be paired with almost anything. Some soldiers ate the bamboo shoots straight from the can as a snack, while others saved them to add to special meals. Wheat noodles with miso broth was a comforting filling dish when rice rations ran short. Miso udon combined thick, chewy wheat noodles with a rich, savory miso broth, creating a dish that was both satisfying and nourishing. The noodles were made from wheat flour, which was sometimes easier to source than rice. The miso broth provided protein and flavor, while the noodles offered carbohydrates and a different texture than soldiers were used to. The dish could be customized with whatever vegetables or proteins were available. Soldiers would slurp the noodles directly from their bowls, savoring the warmth and the way the broth clung to each strand. The act. Making and eating these rice cakes provided a brief respite from the harsh realities of war. The cakes were also offered as part of religious ceremonies or memorial services. The simplicity of yakimochi made them accessible to everyone, regardless of rank or background. Dried kelp strips were boiled into soup for minerals or eaten directly as salty snacks. Kombu was harvested from coastal waters, dried in the sun, and cut into strips that could be stored indefinitely without refrigeration. The kelp was rich in iodine, calcium, and other minerals that were essential for maintaining health. Soldiers would add kombu to soups and stews to enhance the flavor and create a rich umami broth. The kelp could also be eaten directly as a chewy, salty snack, though the texture was tough and required some effort to chew through. The simplicity of kombu made it a staple in military rations, and it was distributed to units across all theaters of the war. The strips were lightweight and compact, which made them easy to transport and store. The resulting broth was flavorful and nutritious, and it formed the base for many other dishes. Powdered soy milk drink was a rare but valuable ration, offering protein and a milk substitute for soldiers who had gone months without dairy products. The powder was made by drying soy milk into a fine dust that could be reconstituted with water. The result was a creamy, slightly sweet beverage that tasted vaguely like cow's milk, but with a distinct soybean flavor. The drink was not as rich or satisfying as real milk, but it provided protein, calcium, and other nutrients that were difficult to obtain in a wartime diet. Soldiers would mix the powder with hot or cold water depending on the season. Some soldiers used the powder to